The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Capehart with the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center, or the APS TARC. I want to welcome you to our webinar, Fraud Pitches, Why They Work, and What You Can Do About it. And I'll introduce our speakers here in just a moment. Next slide. Before we get started, I want to share a little bit of information. A quick disclaimer, this webinar is being hosted by the APS TARC, which is a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, and administered by WRMA Incorporated. Contractors and speakers' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent the official policy of the federal government. I get quicker every time I read that. Next slide. This webinar is being brought to you by collaboration amongst the Administration for Community Living's Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services Resource Centers. You see them listed on this slide, and we invite you to visit the websites for each of the centers to learn about the work that they do. Today's slides are available to download where you can access these links that you see on your screen. Next slide. Now on to a little bit of housekeeping. Handouts and slides, as I just mentioned, are available in the handouts section of your webinar control panel. You may download them at any time. We'll also post them with the recording of the webinar. Please use your computer speakers to access audio for this webinar. Please make sure the speaker volume is adjusted to your desired volume. If you experience any audio or connection problems during the presentation, we recommend that you sign out or X out of the webinar and then come back in. That usually fixes a lot of the tech issues that we have. So that's our recommendation if you have any connection problems. Next slide. We're planning to have time at the end of the panel discussion for questions and comments, but you may ask questions of our presenters at any time during the webinar by typing them into the questions box of your control panel. We will relay as many as we can to the speakers when we pause for questions at the end of all of the presentations. This presentation is being recorded. As I said, it will be posted to the APS TARC website at a later date, along with a copy of the slides, and we'll notify you when that recording and those slides are posted on our website. You'll get an email about that in about 2, 3, 4 weeks. Everyone attending today will receive an email in approximately 24 hours with a link to download your certificate of attendance. If you need that for any reason, you'll be able to grab that from that message. And be sure to take the brief eval when prompted at the end of this webinar. It will pop up on your screen. We would love to have your feedback about what you thought of the event. Next slide. So before we get started, let's get a quick sense of who is joining us today. I'm going to launch a quick poll right now, and your screen will change, and you can vote with it, on this by clicking directly on your screen. What profession do you identify most closely with? Are you a social services professional? Are you a legal assistance professional, a medical professional, justice professional, or other? Do none of those categories fit for you? So we'll leave this open for just a minute and give folks a chance to vote. And again, you can vote by clicking directly on your screen. If you're in full screen mode, you may have to exit from that before you're able to vote. But again, just pick which one you like and click the category that corresponds most closely with the profession you identify with. So we'll leave this up about 10 more seconds or so to see what the responses are like, and then I'll share the responses with everybody. All right, I'm going to close that poll out now and share the results with everybody. So 80% of you were social services professionals, 3% legal assistants, 1% medical, 1% justice, and 16% fit in the other categories. So good to know, and thanks for joining us today, whatever your profession is. Next slide. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We have several. We have Hillary Dallin, Director of the Office of Elder Justice and APS at the Administration on Aging, Administration for Community Living, Department of Health and Human Services. We also have Jacqueline Blase-Fried, Assistant Director of the Consumer Protection Branch at the United States Department of Justice. We have Marty DeLima, PhD, Assistant Professor at University of Minnesota School of Social Work. Gary Matola, who's also PhD, Research Director, FINRA Investor Education Foundation. Mark Vanderskoff is joining us, Public Guardian / Public Conservator for the County of Marin. And then Amanda Reyes, the Senior Program Coordinator for the Marin County Area Agency on Aging. So we have some great speakers today. Next slide. So now we'll hear a few opening remarks from Hillary Dallin with the Office of Elder Justice and APS. Hillary, the floor is all yours.
Okay, there we go. All right, whoops. I was there for
Uh-oh, Hillary, if you're still with us, we're having...
I
Oh,
am, but
there you are. We can hear you.
I can't get my camera to turn on. I'm going to try one more time.
Sure.
There
you
we
are.
go. Okay, now we got audio and visual, so now we can start. Thank you all very much for joining the 2023 Administration for Community Living, Department of Justice, Frauds and Scams webinar series. Last year, many of you will recall, we explored a couple of common scams and frauds that have a disparate impact on older adults. And after each of those webinars, we heard from many of the participants about how their own loved ones, family, friends, and sometimes themselves had been targeted by these scams and had been exposed to and experienced the insidious effects of these scams. So we decided that this year we would then take a full look at the lifespan of these scams and frauds with the same frame that we've always taken, which is it requires all of us, an all of us approach to vanquish these insidious schemes. It takes dedicated enforcers like Jackie Blasey Fried, who we're going to hear from in a moment. It takes committed social and human services providers like our speakers, Mark and Amanda, and so many who we just learned are on this webinar participating. And it takes expert researchers like Marty and Gary, who whose evidence-based findings enable us to get better at being effective in addressing scams and frauds. Our goal in this webinar series is to provide actionable learnings that empower all of us to collaborate, partner, learn together so we can better fight these frauds and empower older adults, of which I am proud to be one, to resist, to mitigate, and to recover from exposure to these awful experiences. So we're going to start at the beginning today with the fraud pitch, why they work, and what you can do about it. We hope you'll stay with us through the next 3 webinar sessions that we will be offering over the next few months on reporting and attempting to recover what's been lost, on helping with emotional recovery, and with prevention. So without any further delays, it is now my great honor and privilege to introduce Jackie Blasey Fried, Assistant Director, Consumer Protection Branch, Department of Justice. Jackie, it's my pleasure to hand this off to you.
Thank you so much to Hillary, and thank you so much to your team for being the co-host of this webinar series. I always enjoy the webinar series that I'm able to do with APS and to do with ACL, in part because of the audience. You all are so engaged in these topics. You are really on the front line, seeing these issues day to day. And I always learn something new whenever I have these webinars and have an opportunity to chat with you all. So my role today is to just speak with you for just a couple of minutes and give you a very quick overview in terms of where we are with scams. Now, what I'm going to do here in just a few minutes is talk to you a little bit about the losses that are being experienced by consumers across the country. Before I do that, before I start talking numbers, of course, we have to acknowledge that not all losses due to fraud are economics. And in fact, in the 3rd webinar series, as Hillary said, we're going to spend some time talking about the non-monetary loss that victims experience when they end up on a fraudster's hook. But because it does give us a sense of where fraud is moving and gives us a sense of really how pervasive frauds and scams are, I want to briefly talk about some of what consumers told us they experienced in 2022. All of these numbers comes from the Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Sentinel Network. Consumer Sentinel Network is the single largest complaint database in the world, and they have a really great Tableau page where you can experiment and you can drill down on what consumers are telling the government, telling nonprofits, telling law enforcement about the frauds that they're experiencing. And what they told us is that in 2022, There were over 725,000 reports of imposter fraud. And as I think Dr. DeLima is going to get into today, some of those involve tech support, government imposter, but they can also involve things like romance fraud. Those 725,000 people told us that they lost $2.6 billion. The average loss to a consumer was about $1,000. And we know, of course, that fraud is underreported. So these probably only represent a fraction of the losses that are actually out there. One of the trends that we're seeing in consumer fraud and in imposter scams that's worth noting is we're seeing fraudsters pretend to be businesses now more frequently than they're pretending to be the government. We're seeing more fraudsters pretend to be Amazon or a bank than they are pretending to be the FBI or the Department of Justice. One trend to really be on the lookout for is the incredible rise in investment scams. Investment scams from 2021 to 2022 were up 74%. And the losses to the people who reported, which was about 100,000 to the Federal Trade Commission, was about $3 billion. And we also see that people who lose money to an investment scam tend to lose more than people who lose money to other scams. The average loss that was reported by consumers in that area was about $5,000. And actually in the last quarter of 2022, it was about $7,500. It was significantly higher. We know that older adults and younger adults do experience fraud differently. An older adult is more likely to pay via gift card, which you're going to hear a lot about today, less likely to pay via cryptocurrency. An older adult is more likely to be contacted on the phone, whereas younger adults are more likely to be contacted via social media. So what we're here to talk about today is, why do these scams work? And what I think is really great is our two presenters are going to talk about the external factors as well as the internal factors. What do fraudsters tell us that works, as well as how does the own way that we view the world have an impact on our potential susceptibility to frauds and scams? And then finally, we're going to hear from some really great on-the-ground practitioners who are going to talk about what they're doing in their communities. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Andy.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Appreciate all that information. Next slide. So our next speaker is Dr. Marty DeLima with the University of Minnesota School of Social Work, and we're going to hear all about what she has to say. I turn the virtual floor over to you, Dr. DeLima.
All right, next slide. So I'm going to share with you some recent qualitative data on the pitch, where I'm going to talk about the tactics that scammers use to convince consumers to buy gift cards. So we're going to focus on many different scams here, but the method of payment is all the same. It's gift cards. Next slide. So the way I describe the pitch, it's the tactics and communication styles that scammers use to convince and coerce their targets to believe their stories and comply with their demands for money. So in our interviews with individuals who've experienced a gift card payment scam, we found that they were reporting so many different scam types, but across the interviews, we found many of the same emotional devices and scripted maneuvers used by the criminals. So we'll talk about that in the next slide. So this was part of a study that was funded by AARP. The focus was on gift card payment scams. We recruited locally as well as using survey methods because it's University of Minnesota. Many of our participants are from the Midwest. Majority women and white individuals, 70% were over 50 years old. 22 people lost a total of $55,000 in gift card purchases. I will say that there was 2 outliers in the sample. One person lost 20 grand and another person, it was 12,000 was stolen from them. So if you remove those 2 folks from the sample, median losses were closer to around, $100 to $500. And again, it was 27 participants who were interviewed over Zoom. Next slide. As I said, there were so many different scam types represented in this small sample of 27 people. We had 2 romance scam victims. We had an IRS and a missed jury duty, government imposter scam victims, couple employment scams that also included bogus check fraud, business impersonation like fake utility company calling and saying you owe money, Amazon, of course, couple tech support scams, and family friend imposter. Most of these scams were over the phone, or at least they moved onto the phone, but some of these individuals were first targeted by an email phishing or a phone text. Next slide. We found that all the scams at least involved one perpetrator, sometimes several, and they were all they were practiced in messaging and other strategies to really provoke an emotional arousal, which might have been positive or negative. Positive in the case of the employment scams and the romance scam, but negative in the majority of these cases. And I'm going to talk more in depth about some of these tactics, but a lot of them involved threats, using urgency, coming off as an authority. Sometimes they hacked into the person's computer initially and made high-pitched noises play out of the computer speakers, and they usually demanded privacy and confidentiality. However, I would also claim that majority of the fraud criminals in their interactions with the target, they were calm, they presented as knowledgeable and helpful. Next slide. This is one of our participants who was a middle-aged adult male, and he's actually a dentist. And he said, and they were basically saying there was a warrant out for my arrest and the cops are on their way. They were on their way to come get me right then and there. And this scam was premised around missing jury duty and being in trouble for missing jury duty. And the thing I want to comment on about this person's story was that he actually had received his jury summons a couple weeks before while he was busy at work. And he said he quickly glanced at it and set it aside, and then he forgot about it. So for him, this call seemed plausible because he might have actually missed jury duty. So this is not a person who has any characteristics necessarily that make him vulnerable, but when the call came in and having this prior experience increased the plausibility of the scam. Next slide. Here's another participant's direct quote. She was targeted by a tech support scam. She said, so I was working on my computer and all of a sudden the screen froze and there was this loud noise. It sounded like when your smoke alarm goes off, but coming through a foghorn. It was really, really, really loud. And then this red flashing light came onto my screen and said, your computer has been hacked. Contact Microsoft support immediately at this number, which I did. So you can see that this person was subjected to strong emotional arousal and a strong stimulus. And you can imagine if any of us were trying to make a reasoned decision or trying to do a hard financial problem at the same time that our fire alarm is going off in our homes or apartments, it would be really difficult. So that was basically the main tactic that these scammers did to both grab her attention and get her into a place where she can't make reasoned decisions. Next slide. So many of the scams involved fear arousal or some type of emotional arousal, like threat of arrest. Some people told that hackers have taken over their device. They're downloading child pornography on your device. There was a threat of financial loss. One participant thought she was talking to her power company, and they said, if you've missed your bill payments, we're going to come shut off your power at your business. Other people have been told that their bank accounts are in jeopardy and their identity is compromised. And the way that the participants described the impact of the fear is they said it was like being in the clouds and having a reptile brain and in panic mode. So these kind of high arousal emotional states really prevented rational processing, even of warning messages. So even when a retailer or someone in the stores where they're told to go buy these gift cards makes a direct appeal to them to try to get them to stop, sometimes those states of mind that they're in, they can't even correctly process that message. So that was another reason why some of the interventions weren't even very effective. Next slide. The other major tactic that was pretty consistent throughout the stories that we heard was demands for secrecy and privacy. So the scammers told their targets, you need to stay on the phone, don't hang up. They maintained pressure constantly. They surveilled them, or they made them feel that they were being followed or surveilled. Especially using Google Maps, they were able to direct them from store to store in their town and where they're going. And they also told the targets, don't tell anyone else. This is just between us, or this is a highly sensitive matter that we're trying to take care of, or if you tell anyone else, the real criminals are going to come after you. So secrecy and privacy and confidentiality were really critical as a scammer tactic. Next slide. So as I said before, calling back to the story of the participant who was told that he missed jury duty, there were other tactics that scammers use to increase the plausibility of the situation and the demands for gift cards. Sometimes if targets weren't sure, or they might conference in the target's bank, just bringing in another scammer, sometimes reading the participant's actual financial information back to them. If they had already hacked into their financial accounts, they would have access to that information. If the target ever disclosed their address, or maybe they were targeted specifically and the scammer already had that information, it really seemed like this person was nearby and could actually threaten their well-being. And they would say, okay, you live here, I want you to go here and go to this next place. So giving them kind of turn-by-turn directions while they're on the phone and driving in their car. They would sometimes have fake employee IDs or badge numbers ready if the target questioned their credibility. And they would really just have an excuse ready at any kind of pushback or anything seems suspicious or implausible. Next slide. So this is a participant who was targeted, I think it was another tech support scam, and she got some pushback from the retailer. So she went outside and she was still on the phone with her criminal, and she said, I just need to contact my bank. And he said, you won't be able to contact the bank because it's a bank holiday and we need to stop this right away. So again, excuse was ready. And then he said, let me link you to the bank support person. He's there to make it easy. I'll get her on the line too. So another person gets on, and then this woman comes on. She has a really calm voice. Just take some deep breaths. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Get a drink of water. Do you have access to transportation? And I said, yes. And keep me on the phone and keep your computer open. Next slide. So you can see that this person, comes off. They're threatening the person, but then they're also offering reassurance and saying, I'm on your side. So this person ultimately did go to certain stores, bought $5,000, more than that, of Apple gift cards. And then she said, and let me know when you're done, and I'll cancel the charge, and we'll be able to stop this hacking person from getting into your financials. So this is actually an Amazon imposter and bank imposter scam. So again, really complicated, ready with excuses, and always just shepherding the person from decision to decision. Next slide. So as I said, another tactic that criminals use in their pitch is reciprocity. They might come off really intense and really hard, and there's this big threatening problem, but they're the solution to the problem. They're going to help the target get through it. So it's kind of like, I'm here to help you, but you have to follow my directions in order for me to help you the best. Scapegoating, many of them, found they were pointing to a different entity or person, saying that those are the ones that are causing this problem, those are the hackers, or there's delays in the shipment or whatever it might be, but they're good at deflecting suspicion, deflecting blame. They build rapport by asking personal questions. One woman said that this criminal must have heard her dog in the background and asked, what kind of breed is that? Tell me more about your dog. And it actually frightened her because she thought that the person was there and actually, physically present and watching her. And then she's like, wait a second, you're not here. You just heard that my dog in the background. And then again, showing some compassion. Another woman has mobility issues and gets fatigued easily. And she said that to the scammer. And they said, okay, we'll find a place to sit down in the store. And then when you're ready, we'll get up and we'll keep going from store to store. Next slide. So I just want to kind of close. This presentation was really focused on the pitch, and I have a lot more information about how the interventions and what worked and what didn't work. But the scams really ended when the target either received a direct intervention, often from a retail store person like a cashier or a manager, but sometimes from friends and family member, and sometimes from law enforcement as well. So in one case, it was a woman's coworker that overheard the call and directly called law enforcement, and they came to the office, which, of course, could be a very humiliating experience for some people, but it definitely saved her from further loss. And then other times, the scammer's request for more and more money just became so absurd. Like one woman who was told that her iPad had a problem, it was a tech support scam, purchased so many gift cards that they eventually exceeded the cost of purchasing a new iPad. And we asked her, was there anything on the iPad that was really valuable that you couldn't lose? And she said, no, You know, again, it's all about being in the ether and being in this headspace where you can't make reasoned decisions. Next slide. So I just want to end with kind of the impact of these crimes on the participants in the study. This is an employment scam respondent. She was actually a really young college student. She said, genuinely, I feel ashamed still to this day about it. It wasn't like shock. It was like the part of my mind that was yelling at me the whole time finally was aligned with my consciousness or whatever. And so it just suddenly, all of a kind came forward as a realization. And I just felt blank and obviously felt very dumb about it. But the shame is the thing. I don't want people to find out that this had happened. Last slide. All right, that's it for me, and I'm happy to answer your questions if there's time at the end.
Thank you, Dr. DeLima. Those are some very sophisticated scams. That's some pretty scary stuff. I learned some new things myself listening to that, so thanks so much for that information. Next, we will hear from Dr. Gary Mottola, Research Director of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. Dr. Mottola, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andrew. And you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to be summarizing some research we released in late 2021 that you can see the title here, Exposed to Scams, Can Challenging Consumers' Beliefs Protect Them from Fraud? And I do want to tell you a little bit about the study, more kind of a little story behind it because it's important to understand the context. So the FINRA Foundation has been conducting research on financial fraud for nearly 2 decades now, and we typically use the usual research approach. We do survey-based research, we'll do focus groups, et cetera. For this study, we wanted to take a different approach. We wanted to use an ethnographic approach. And to do that, we partnered with the Better Business Institute for Marketplace Trust, researchers from there, and a researcher from the University of Minnesota. And yes, that researcher is Marty. And of course, we collaborated with an ethnographer to kind of embark on this kind of new type of study for us. And so what is ethnography? I'm not an ethnographer, I'm a psychologist, so I'm gonna read it. It involves the study and description of group culture and how it affects the way individuals see and interact with the world. And it can be used to uncover beliefs, values, and attitudes that might drive behavior. So essentially, as researchers, we wanted to use this ethnographic approach to say, is it possible that the way people view the world is related to their susceptibility to fraud? So that's kind of the context that we used. So that's a little bit about the study. So we use this concept called mental frames. So we'll talk in more detail about mental frames on the next slide. But what are mental frames? So essentially, and this is a really kind of simplistic view of them. To get it in 10 minutes. But so, we learn throughout our life. From the moment we're born, we learn, and learning is a very social thing. We learn formally in school. We learn from experiences. We learn from our family and friends and social interactions. And what we learn essentially contributes to forming what we call mental frames. And you think about mental frames, they're just essentially the frame that you view the world through. What information you filter, what information you focus on, and the way you view the world with mental frames can essentially be related to behavior. Now, we're particularly interested in how mental frames are related to fraud susceptibility, so we're going to focus on that for this study. As you'll see momentarily when we go to the next slide, we have 4 different frames. We'll talk about each frame and how they're related to potentially related to fraud susceptibility, because I do have some caveats and some additional information at the end. So actually, I do want to say one other thing. So when I say this is an ethnographic study, yes, we used an ethnographer. And what we did is we interviewed 17 people, and these were the ethnographic style interviews. 17 people who who were all targeted for fraud. Most lost money, some did not. And when I say it was an ethnographic style study, for most of the interviews, the ethnographer went to the person's house, right? And the interviews went from 1 to 2 hours, and being in the person's house gave the ethnographer access to how the person lived, the way they lived, who they interacted with, lots of information that the ethnographer can build into kind of help. It was a him in this instance, help him understand how this person lost money in a fraud and why they lost money in a fraud. So these were very in-depth interviews that very often took place in the person's house, and we do have some videos on these, which I'll talk about on the last slide. Okay, so let's talk a little about these frames, and hopefully you can't hear my dogs barking. I don't think you can, but if you can, I apologize. So let's talk about compliance. So compliance is essentially, let me just get my notes here. So most of us need to comply in life, right? We have job assignments, the speed limit. Most people comply with the speed limit. Taxes, pay taxes. So that there are things that often we need to comply with. Some people may view compliance differently. Some people may view compliance as optional. Well, yeah, I can comply, or maybe I'll comply. And others may view compliance as a duty. It's something else. If somebody in a position of authority is asking me to do something, I'm doing it. And you could see how you viewed compliance, how someone viewed compliance could be related to fraud susceptibility. For example, government imposter scams like the IRS scam, right? That's using authority to try to get people to part with their money. And somebody who views compliance as a duty might be more susceptible than somebody who views it as optional. Now, I'm going to talk about the other three frames, but I do want to point out two things about mental frames. First, it's important to understand that we're not, this is completely non-judgmental. We're not saying viewing compliance as optional or is better than viewing compliance as a duty, or vice versa. What we're trying to establish is the way you view compliance, is that related to fraud susceptibility. So that's one thing. The second point I want to make is we're not suggesting these frames are all or nothing, right? It's not like you view it completely as optional or you view it completely compliance or completely as a duty. More likely there's a continuum of some type, and where you land on that continuum could influence your susceptibility to fraud. And the last point I'll make is we're focusing on 4 mental frames, so to speak, that we identified and we believe are related to fraud, but there are many mental frames. We're just focusing on these. So let's talk about opportunity. Opportunity you could think of in some ways, you could think of as wealth, right? Some people may think wealth is often results from lucky breaks or being lucky, where some people might think it's earned. Related to that is related to wealth and opportunity is kind of the zero-sum view, right? So some people might say, yeah, wealth is essentially a zero-sum game. If I don't get my slice of the pie, someone else is going to get it. Whereas somebody else might look at wealth in a more infinite way, that the pie is really large and it's growing, and I don't have to worry about somebody stealing my slice. So you can imagine somebody who take somebody who views opportunity or wealth in terms of lucky breaks and in terms of a zero-sum game, right? So they get a compelling investment scam offer. They say, wow, I'm lucky, man. I can't believe this person's making this offer to me. And if they view the world in a zero-sum game, they may say, hey, well, if I don't take this offer, somebody else is going to get it. And so they'd be more inclined to take the offer. And if you think about the tactics that investment fraudsters use, scarcity in particular, it plays to this, right? So only the first 100 investors are going to get into this opportunity, kind of things like that. Or today's the only day you can get into this investment opportunity. So plays on kind of this opportunity mental frame. Intelligence is essentially, it's really beliefs about intelligence. And if you think about intelligence from a kind of an evolutionary standpoint, it's very important, right? Being intelligent and having people perceive you as intelligent can be very important. And there are a couple ways people can view intelligence. One way, and think about, and let's focus on questions, right? So somebody may say, hey, if I ask a lot of questions, people might say, hey, this person doesn't know very much. They don't really know how the world works or how the cookie crumbles, so to speak. Whereas, and the other alternative, somebody who maybe views asking questions as a path to more knowledge, more intelligence, so that they're going to be open to asking questions because they don't think it's going to make them look bad or make them look dumb or stupid, for lack of a better word. That asking questions is a path to more knowledge. So someone, you could completely see how this would be related to fraud, because one of the best defenses against fraud is to ask questions, right? So ask questions about the legitimacy of the offer. Ask questions about the background of the person making the offer. So if you're hesitant, if you view intelligence in a way that if I ask a lot of questions, it's going to make me look unintelligent, that may be related to fraud susceptibility. And the last one is order or beliefs. This is probably the most prevalent one and probably the easiest to kind of get our heads around. And it's kind of the belief, if you think about the belief in a just world, right? If you have a strong belief in a just world, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And so most people think they're a good person. So if you're a good person, you think bad things like fraud wouldn't happen to you. You might be, you might put your guard down, right? Whereas if you take a different view where the world is a random place and anything can happen to anyone at any time, you may be kind of a little more, what's the word, suspicious about offers. So again, how you view the world in terms of belief in a just world or the state of order in the world could be related to fraud susceptibility. So we can go to the next and last slide. And so this is just to wrap up a couple points here. One, so what do we know about mental frames and fraud susceptibility? And when I put on my researcher hat, I have to say not enough, right? This is what we call a qualitative study. So it was essentially, it's based on kind of words and meaning and not numbers, data, and statistics. So it's based on 17 people, right? These 17 people might not, first of all, this is a very small sample. Second of all, they might not represent the general population. Maybe if we went to a different 17 people, we've come out with different kind of answers or hypotheses. So yeah, we don't really know whether mental frames are related to susceptibility. This is a hypothesis. But what we're doing right now, and Marty's involved in this as well, is we're doing a quantitative study with about 3,000 adults. We're about to go into the field to collect the data. We're going to collect data and see if we could establish an empirical relationship between these mental frames and fraud susceptibility. And if we can, you could think of some of the tools that might be available. We could have a quiz where you answer 10 questions and it might give you a fraud susceptibility score, where high is bad and low is good. Or even educational interventions that can be targeted using mental frames. Maybe an educational piece can focus on compliance and how we view compliance and how we view order and things like that. You have to be worded carefully, but it's still a possibility that this research could change the way we view education around fraud. And the last point I'll make is that resources, there's lots. If you go to that link, you'll find the report that we're talking about. You'll find a one-page infographic summarizing it. I think the most interesting thing is the victim videos, right? So you could see the videos of I think we have about 6 of them up, not all 17, and they're only pieces of the videos, but you can get a sense of how these videos went and kind of how we derived the insights we derived. And of course, at that website, you'll find other fraud-related research. Thanks for your time, and I'll, like the other speakers, I'll be sticking around to see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mazzola. And for what it's worth, I could not hear your dogs. I don't think the audience could either, so I think you're okay.
I knew it was going to be a problem because the postal worker comes every day around this point.
Of course, never fails. That was really interesting information. Thanks. It was interesting to hear how all that was framed, to use your term. So thanks so much. Next slide. All right, and I think at this point we will turn it over to our 2 final speakers, Mark Vanderskoff, Public Guardian, Public Conservator at Marin County, and Amanda Reyes, Senior Program Coordinator at Marin County Area Agency on Aging. And Mark, I don't see Amanda on our speaker list, so I don't know if she's with you or she's coming on a little bit late.
Okay, well, I may need to do her portion of the slides.
Okay, just want to give you a warning there. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we're going to be telling you today about one county's response to financial abuse, this huge problem that we've been hearing about today. So next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, what is FAST? FAST stands for Financial Abuse Specialist Team. So we are a team that consists of both private and public sector employees who provide training and consultation on recognizing, investigating, and preventing elder financial abuse. Marin County is located in California. California has a very large population of older adults. In our county, currently 28% of our population is age 60 or over. Also, over 30% of the reports made to our local Adult Protective Services unit contain an allegation of financial abuse. This makes financial abuse the most reported form of elder abuse in the county. So FAST addresses this issue, and our program can be replicated. So next slide, please. Okay, the team has existed in Marin County since 2008. In 2015, we underwent a major reorganization. The team is housed in Marin Aging Adult Services Office, which is the home for Adult Protective Services and the local area agency on aging. We came up with a new and sustainable organizational structure, which has existed through this day. So our current program protocols, we have bi-monthly meetings. We have agendas and minutes that we take at the meetings and send out to all the members. All of our meetings and investigations are kept strictly confidential according to a memorandum of understanding developed by our county council. The AAA program coordinator writes and distributes a quarterly electronic financial abuse newsletter. This is given to all team members and all partners. This is to keep the team informed of local developments and national trends in investigating financial abuse. Referrals to the team are only made through the Public Guardian Office, Adult Protective Services, or law enforcement. Next slide, please. All right, so I will take this slide. I don't think Mandy is here yet. So the FAST structure today, the program is chaired by the Public Guardian and staffed by an Area Agency on Aging program coordinator. The unique part about our program is that we utilize the services of 21 volunteers from the county with financial expertise. These are from areas such as accounting, law, business, and banking. The team has two functions. We have created a PowerPoint which we take out to the community to educate older adults on how to prevent being taken advantage of by scams. And we also process financial abuse cases in which the abuse has already occurred, utilizing a forensic accounting technique, and then we refer the cases on, hopefully, to our local district attorney. This helps out the APS social workers and local law enforcement. They don't have the time or the expertise to sift through financial records to try and make a case for abuse. All right, next slide, please. So these are our partners: Aging and Adult Services, Adult Protective Services, Ombudsman, and Public Guardian. We work closely with the District Attorney Office and with law enforcement. It's key to have the District Attorney's buy-in. The District Attorney sends a representative to each meeting. They help us track cases after the cases get there. And they also can function as someone for us to bounce ideas off of before it even gets to the District Attorney level. All right, next slide, please. Volunteers for the FAST team are treated similarly to county volunteers. We onboard them in pretty much the same way. We work with the county volunteer department to onboard them. First step is they sign up and qualify as a volunteer. If they have the requisite background and they're interested in working on the FAST team, they can be referred to the Public Guardian chair and the volunteer department for an interview. If the application is accepted, then the volunteer department conducts fingerprinting and vets the applicant. If criminal record clearance is obtained, then the member will sign a conflict of interest statement stating that they won't profit from being on the FAST team. They also sign an oath of confidentiality, which we've already mentioned, to protect all of the clients and communications that are under the umbrella of the team. They agree to attend our bi-monthly meetings, and they agree to participate in the structure of the team, which means they're either going to be going out into the community and assisting with presentations on how to avoid scams, or they're going to be processing the cases that do come into us where the financial abuse has already occurred. We also have them complete any trainings that the county employees need to complete. Currently, these are in the areas of compliance, privacy, and sexual harassment. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of program costs, our local area agency on aging funds the team. The staff time that is the staff time is donated by the Public Guardian's Office and the Area Agency on Aging team. Our operating costs this year, we had a budget of $3,500, obviously fairly small. So we use this mainly for printing and distribution of educational materials. We've also used it for program development. Recently, we used it for the development of our team logo and also for retooling our FAST brochure. We also participate yearly in a World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event. This year, the team is helping, we're planning with 2 neighboring counties, Napa and Sonoma, an Elder Justice Summit, which is going to be highlighting all forms of elder abuse, including financial abuse. The parent organization of the Area Agency on Aging, which is the N4A, did recognize the work of the team in 2019 by giving the team an Aging Achievement Award. This is given for improving the lives of older adults and caregivers. So next slide, please. All right, that's basically our program. The program is easily replicated. We have had a neighboring county that has already replicated it. The reliance on volunteers makes it more doable, I think, for some organizations. And we certainly welcome inquiries. We would be happy to share the forms that we have or share any expertise that we have in terms of trying to create a FAST team in your own county. So that's it. Thank you. Next slide.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vanderskuff. That was very interesting. I've heard very positive things about the FAST teams that have come out of California. Very impressive to hear about how yours operates as well. So, all right. Well, I think at this point is a good time to take questions. All of the attendees, feel free to type your questions into the questions box, and we will relay them because we have a few minutes left in order to pose some questions to our speakers. So we do have a couple questions already. And I think this first question could probably go to anybody, but probably Dr. DeLima or Dr. Mottola would be more appropriate for you to answer. And the question is, do you think older generations are more susceptible to scams due to their mental frames? So actually, I think that's for Dr. Mottola. Again, do you think other generations are more susceptible to scams due to their mental frames?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And yeah, that's a thorny one. The relationship between age and fraud susceptibility, it's not particularly clear. And Marty, you may want to weigh in on this too. I'm pretty sure she has some thoughts on it. You know, whether older people are targeted more, whether they're more susceptible, there's mixed research on it. In terms of the mental frames, that's a really interesting question that, to be honest, we don't have any data on. But more importantly, we haven't given much thought to that. I think, and actually, often events like this are helpful because we get ideas that we'll want to pursue. My sense, though, is that yes, mental frames would be related to age or generation, let's say, and you know, you can imagine, you know, a baby boomer having a very different view on kind of compliance than a Gen Zer, for example. So I think it's a good point, and I think we will hopefully have some data on whether there are generational differences in mental frames and whether that increases or potentially decreases susceptibility to fraud.
Great, thank you, Dr. Mottola. That is very interesting. Let's see, what else do we have? This is probably a question for Mr. Vanderskuff. Is the FAST team funded by the SMP at all or in partnership? Again, is the FAST team funded by the SMP, which I believe may be Senior Medicare Patrol, at all or in partnership?
No, we are not in partnership with them. All of our money comes through the local Area Agency on Aging, which is Older American Act monies.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. Here's one good question. Do you have any suggestions on how APS workers can differentiate themselves from scammers when contacting clients? It's not difficult to understand the client's increasing wariness. Again, do you have any suggestions on how APS workers can differentiate themselves from scammers when contacting clients, it's not difficult to understand the client's increasing wariness. So either Dr. Mottola or maybe Dr. DeLima, if you have any tips on clients who may be wary that their APS caseworker calling is a scammer. The tough one.
Marty, do you want to weigh in on that one? Or...
Sure, I can give an attempt. So, this is a great question maybe for practitioners and people who have experience, interacting with older clients who've experienced fraud. I think that what I've heard, trust building is so important, as it is with all types of adult protection. I'm trying to think of best practices, but they're all face-to-face best practices. Actually visiting the person at their home and discussing it with them. But what I've found works from some practitioners is using a non-confrontational approach, saying that there's been reports and that there's concerns and that your goal is to really work with the person to understand what's going on, to kind of address the fraud, but really meet them where they are, because people might not actually be recognized or be willing to say that what happened to them was a scam yet. So kind of meeting the victim in their own understanding of this interaction. But also, differentiating the APS worker from the person's financial institution, for example. I'm just here to try to understand what's going on and make sure you're supported. So kind of taking that person-centered approach. Not really that much different than the approach you would take working with victims of all types of abuse.
Yeah, certainly.
Just add real quickly that we had that issue with the research we just discussed. So we basically got a list of people who were exposed to fraud from the Better Business Bureau, and we basically said, hey, would you like to can we conduct an interview with you? And they basically said, and some said, how do we know you're not a scammer? And we had a system set up in place where the person could call a number and the number could be verified publicly that it was actually a BBB number. So there may be some logistical things like that can be done as well.
Good point. Thank you, Dr. Mottola. All right, another question for actually any of our panelists. What are ways to best address stigma related to victims of financial abuse and how to encourage reporting? Again, what are ways to best address stigma related to victims of financial abuse and how to encourage reporting?
Well, one thing I would do is normalize that it's not just older adults. In fact, if you look at the Federal Trade Commission's data, you find that it's actually middle-aged adults report fraud at higher rates. So one, just normalizing it, that everyone, will likely be a victim of some scam at some point in their lifetime. And then also just describe the benefits of reporting fraud. For one, it helps federal agencies target, resources and enforcement actions against the big trending scams. It informs what, consumer education they're putting out. Two, if you've been harmed in a crime, by raising your hand and saying, this is my experience and this is how much I lost, if there ever is a case against that criminal entity and some money recovered, you want to be on that list of getting some recovery. So that's another, reason why I think people should report, is because it might take 10 years, but you're at least giving yourself this opportunity to be identified as harmed by that crime to get some money back in the future, maybe.
Yeah.
And Andrew, we've done some research on kind of changing the language around fraud victimization. So don't say somebody fell for fraud, just change the way we speak about it.
Right.
This person had their money stolen from them.
Right.
So things like that, I think in the media, in our line of work, that changes the dialogue around it to Marty's point, make it perhaps less embarrassing for people and more willing to report.
Yep, I think that's an excellent.
Yeah, and we try and do that in our meetings when we meet with older adults and preventing scams, trying to normalize it. That's exactly true. One of the problems the team has actually is we don't get as many cases reported to us as you would think, because people don't want to report it because of shame. So we try and educate our community as much as we can that it happens to everyone. Yeah.
Yep. And the words. Oh, go ahead, Dr. DeLima.
I would just like to see more positive cases of recovery highlighted in the media. Like, we only see negative cases about how this person lost all this money and they're likely never going to get it back, but that's not true for everyone. And I think if we see more success stories, more people will understand the advantages of reporting.
And help reduce that stigma. Yeah, for sure. Great feedback. This is more of a comment that comes back to the question of impersonating an APS worker. This person says, of course, we all employ, tactics that you had mentioned, Dr. DeLima, trying to build trust, but increasingly, who could blame a client for doubting us when we call? And I thought that was an interesting point, because these, as you detailed in your presentation, these are becoming very sophisticated scams. So it's hard to keep ahead of that. So I appreciate that comment. This is one for, I think, Mr. Vanderskoff. I would love more information on how to start a FAST team. So again, any resources you know of on establishing or starting a FAST team?
I think I'd be happy to talk with you offline. I mean, my contact information is in the slide deck, I believe. But as I said, reaching out to your local district attorney, making sure that they're on board, making sure that APS is on board, which they obviously will be, because it's helpful in terms of preventing cases going to them. Mm-hmm. So kind of just getting out into the community and making sure that there's an interest, and then pointing out the benefits. There's a lot of material in terms of if you want to develop a presentation on how to avoid scams. Mm-hmm. Some of the stuff that you've heard today. So it's not that difficult to put the presentation together, but it's more getting the community buy-in and partner buy-in.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And I believe another attendee corrected me that SMP did not stand for Senior Medicare Patrol, so I apologize for making that assumption. So thank you for that. And I think we have time for one final question before we wrap up. And this is a good one, and I think anybody can answer it. What can we do to educate our older population in our individual state? So again, what can we do to educate seniors in our individual state? Any recommendations?
In the that Gary is talking about that I collaborated on, we asked people where they want to get information about scams and fraud. And the number one is the media. People still watch the news, and I think if we can have more of the latest scams highlighted on the news and on the radio, I think that actually does seem to work. From some of our preliminary data, we found that consumer education is effective. There's a decay effect. You have to keep re-upping and keep reminding people. But I would say broad media outreach.
And just building on that, we know knowing about frauds is protective. We know that knowing about the tactics of fraudsters is protective, but we don't know what people know, particularly older adults. So and that's a gap in the research we're trying to fill. What do older adults know about fraud? And once we know what they know and don't know, I think we'll be able to target them with communications information that hopefully via the media, but through other channels as well that could help.
Sure, certainly. All right, well, we are pretty much at the top of the hour, so I'd just like to say thank you to all of our presenters today for the great information that you provided. It was really fascinating stuff. Be on the lookout for an announcement about the next webinar on scams and fraud. And if you'd like to join our mailing list here at the APS TARC, easiest way to do that is just to Google APS TARC, TARC. And just reach out to us. We'll make sure you get the link to join and you're notified when the next webinar takes place. Do we have any closing comments from any of our panelists? Anything anybody else on the line would want to say before we wrap up the next few seconds?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
Thanks to all of you. We really appreciate it because it was great information today. Thanks so much for attending. Again, this will be recorded and we'll notify you when the recording is posted online. A brief evaluation, I think it's 5 questions, pops up at the end of this. So we'd really appreciate it if you could respond to that and give us some feedback. Again, thanks to our panelists today and to all of the attendees for coming and listening to these great presentations. We appreciate it. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
All right.